Sometimes I really struggle with the Bible. We've got these stories, especially stories in Genesis, that are huge epic tales. And there's a part of me that is pretty comfortable with saying these aren't meant to be absolutely, literally true, but there are truths to be found in them. So what do we do with this? Hi, my name is Greg Simpson. I'm a minister in the United Church of Canada. And I think this question around biblical literalism is one of the most important conversations that we should be having today as Christians. It's one of the things that we will encounter every single time we open scriptures. And I'm going to start by arguing that I don't believe that there are any truly, fully literal biblical literalists. Everybody who encounters the Bible is going to take some piece of it in some place and negotiate it away. Say, well, that's literal, but that's not. And that has to be because if you bother to read through all of the Bible, you will find lots of places where this bit disagrees with that bit, or this bit contradicts that bit, or this bit says something quite different from the other. There's no one single voice through the whole Bible. I'm reading from the Protestant Bible, which has 66 books, and among those 66 books, there's about 45 different authors, and probably took about 1,000 years or somewhere in that range from start to finish for it to become a thing. Of course, there are going to be massive differences between the beginning and the end, the different authors, the different intended audiences. So what do we do with these beautiful stories in Genesis that try to help us understand how things began? It might seem like the right answer to study Genesis 1 and 2, but that's for a different day. And I just want to remind you that Genesis 1 has one creation story and Genesis 2 has a second creation story, and even those two don't completely agree with each other in the order of how things happen. So you can get 2 pages into the Bible and already find that there's some things that don't quite agree. So no matter what, you can't be 100% absolutely literalist without already disagreeing with yourself in that time, or without having to do some pretty significant mental and literary gymnastics just to try to make these things line up. What I'm going to do instead is I want to look at the story of Noah. And so, show of hands, who can just recite the story of Noah to me? I'm going to read a little bit from Genesis 6 and 7, just kind of pick and choose some pieces just to remind us of the story. But what we do know is that there was a big flood, and Noah heard from God that the flood was on its way. And so Noah made an ark and got instructions to bring his family and 2 of all of the animals, and then there were like some extras, and bring them into the ark. And then that brings us to a spot where I'm going to read this particular piece because this one stands out for me each time I read it. And so we're at Genesis 7:13. On the very same day, Noah with his sons, Shem and Ham and Japheth, and Noah's wife and the 3 wives of his sons entered the ark. They and every wild animal of every kind, and all domestic animals of every kind, and every creeping thing that creeps on the earth, and every bird of every kind, every bird, every winged creature. They went into the ark with Noah, 2 of all flesh in which there was breath of life. And those that entered, male and female of all flesh, went in as God commanded them, and the Lord shut him in. The flood continued 40 days on the earth. The waters increased and bore up the ark, and it rose high above the earth. It continues on. The reason that I read that, and that particular piece is important for this conversation, because I wonder if you know that other ancient Mesopotamian creation myths have flood stories as well. Perhaps you know that the Epic of Gilgamesh, which predates most of the writings of the Bible by a fairly significant amount, it has a flood story as well. And there are some dramatic similarities between these 2 stories. But I read that verse in particular because we can find maybe the meaning, the truth that we are to draw from this in the differences. So I have read through the Epic of Gilgamesh, or at least most of it. It's pretty hard go, and honestly, just the same as reading the Bible just completely cold off the street, it would be difficult. I've grown up Christian, and so I know lots of these stories, and so when I re-encounter them, I already have a lot of built-in understanding. So for me, opening the Epic of Gilgamesh, I was starting cold. I don't have any ancient Sumerian roots. I didn't grow up with it, and so when I'm reading it, I'm really struggling to get through it because I don't know what all the imagery means. But there are one particular thing that really stands out when you read something like the Epic of Gilgamesh, and that's the one I've read, but there are a couple of other flood stories that we have like some little scraps of, like this piece of pottery or that piece of carving, that we know some of these stories that are very ancient. But the difference between those stories and the Hebrew story has to do with how the humans address the flood. We know that these ancient people feared floods. We still fear floods. We think that we have done an awful lot in modern engineering, and don't get me wrong, we're a pretty amazing folks, but when it comes to a tsunami tidal wave, when it comes to even just a river overflowing its banks, there is not an awful lot we can do. Water, the power of water and the power of Mother Nature is extreme when compared to what we're capable of. There's good reason to fear floods. There's good reason to have a healthy respect for these things that are well outside of our control and outside of our power. In some of these other ancient stories, it is the efforts of the human, and specifically the pilot of the boat, where they best the waters and they best the gods who are causing it in that case. Whereas in our Hebrew narrative, in the story in Genesis, it's God that closes them in. It's God that keeps them safe. It's God who carries them through. See, this is a huge difference in the way the ancient Hebrew people saw God when they compared themselves to some of the other nations around them. They were not saying that God was capricious and evil. They weren't saying that God was a storm god that would inflict this upon them. They were saying, God will take care of us. Now, some of you who might be ancient Hebrew and biblical scholars would like to correct me and tell me that there are definitely connections between the Hebrew Adonai and storm gods like Baal and that sort of thing. I agree. I'm not addressing that conversation today. But this story specifically sees God as the one who takes care. That we in our lives can turn to God who will care for us, as opposed to the gods of all the nations around them who were capricious. And this really feeds into the New Testament as well, where we see Jesus as well as Paul and the other apostles who are living in a Greco-Roman culture with a pantheon of gods who are in general capricious in nature. They do things to humans that aren't caring or loving. The difference is God in this story is loving, which then reminds us, draws us into this story of we are to love God and love each other because God loved us. And there's a huge amount of hope in this, especially seeing as this was written by the underdogs. This is mostly a story about oppressed people trying to find hope in the midst of whatever oppression they are finding, whatever they are feeling. That is the hope that they need. They need to know that they can turn to God when their own power is not enough to best their enemies. And we can use that in the same way. Even if we are the people at the top of the pyramid of privilege, there are still an awful lot of things that are way beyond our power. It could very well be that the society that we live in, it feels like it is overwhelming and we're caught in the maelstrom, the flood of a society that's leading us in a direction we don't particularly want. Perhaps we're looking at what's going on in the country around us and thinking, what the heck? This is way out of control. This is not what I wanted at all. This feels like there is evil run amok. Maybe we're looking at climate change or the gap between the rich and the poor. Maybe we're looking at the way consumerism is just driving culture and ruining people. Maybe those are the floods that we're up against. And yet we're reminded in this story that it's God that closed up the ark, God that kept it afloat amid the maelstrom. It's God that then let them know when it was safe to come out. We need to count on God to care for us when we feel like things are out of control. And it's in the times of gratitude, when we are thankful for God's strength, that we show that gratitude by making sure that we're caring for other people whose lives seem out of control. See, when we turn this into a religion of gratitude only, where it's like, well, thank God I'm not as bad as that person. Thank God that my house is a little more expensive than that one, or thank God that I don't live in that neighborhood. That is not the religion of the Bible. That is a very modern idea that puts us above other people. But you know what? When Noah got locked in the boat, everybody was locked in. They were all equal. And it was that group of equal people that started life anew. So let's see the people around us as all in the same boat, all requiring God's help, all requiring all of us to work together to build a better society on the other side of whatever flood it is that's threatening you today. Let us pray. God, your beautiful truth is available to us when we spend the time to look into your words. We ask you to free us from the capture of a biblical literalism that minimizes your words into just predictions or just rules, and instead open our eyes to the beautiful stories that bring us new life, that remind us of what a loving, caring God you are, and remind us of how in our gratitude to you, we are called to love and care for everybody else. Remind us of how you have created all of us equal, and it's up to us, with your guidance and strength and reminder of humility, to make certain that this world is a place where all are created equal. We ask for your strength. We ask for your conviction in these storms and floods of our lives. Amen. I know that I get deep into the conversations around social justice, but honestly, every time I open this book, I find more and more cases where it's pointing straight at me, being white and English and the top of the pyramid, and saying, listen, you've got power, use it to make the world better for others. This, every time it says love your neighbor, I need to look at who my neighbor is and make certain that it's not the person that I'm accidentally, or maybe not accidentally, holding under my thumb just by being part of the powerful society. Friends, we are being called to change this world. We've been called into that for 1,500 years. We have more technology, more ability, more healthcare, more ability to create food. We have more now than ever before. Let's use that to care for this world and care for the people. Thank you so much for joining me here today. If you've missed any previous daily devotions, you should be able to find a list of them over there. And I invite you to also subscribe. It would be great if you subscribe, click the little thumbs up notification so that YouTube knows that this is the sort of content you love. I love you all so much, and I will see you in our next daily devotion. Bye for now.